There are nights when history feels like a voice just beyond the walls of sleep, whispering, patient, and heavy with something half forgotten. The museum lights fade to a low hum, and behind the glass, one tablet remains awake. Its surface is fractured, the edges softened by millennia of breathless silence. You stand before it in the dim corridors of the Heritage Foundation Institute, where Dr. Caleb Huntington first showed you what they tried to erase. The tablet bears words so old that language itself was still learning to be born. The Sumerian King List, a relic of rulers who reigned before the flood, whose names sound more like wind than men. Some ruled for hundreds of years, others for thousands. It should have been myth. Yet there it lies, carved in baked clay, unmoved by disbelief. Professor Jeremiah Stone's voice echoes in your memory as you trace the cuneiform with your eyes. They want you to believe it's fantasy, but the mathematics don't lie. His 20-year career at Princeton ended the day he published his translation of the classified Baghdad fragments, the ones that vanished during the 2003 invasion, along with so much else that challenged the approved timeline. So before you grow too comfortable with the official story, take a breath. The Heritage Foundation Institute sits in a converted warehouse outside Tucson, far from the ivory towers that cast Stone into academic exile. Here, in the desert silence, truth seekers gather around tables covered with photocopied tablets and smuggled photographs. Captain Dwight Sullivan's Pentagon files rest in manila folders marked with classifications that shouldn't exist. Documents from his 15-year career in archaeological intelligence before conscience forced him into whistleblower status. Imagine standing before the original tablet in the quiet hours when the air itself seems older than Stone. You read, translated by Stone's careful hand, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." The line is simple, yet it unravels everything we've been told. It claims that kingship, the right to rule, was not born of man, but given, bestowed from the sky. Dr. Huntington adjusts his reading glasses, the same ones he wore during 15 years at Yale before they forced his resignation. His weathered hands move across Maxwell Crane's geological surveys, the ones that confirmed what the Smithsonian refused to acknowledge. 8 ancient capitals before a flood came to wash them clean, Huntington murmurs. To the academic establishment, this was mythology, but we looked deeper. The numbers do not behave like stories. They behave like codes. Alulim ruled 2,880 years, Alalgar 3,600, and Menluana 14,320, all perfect multiples of 360, the Sumerian base for measuring celestial cycles. What if these were not lifespans at all, but encoded astronomical periods, great measures of cosmic rhythm preserved by minds that understood what we've forgotten? Tobias Randolph's calculations fill 3 whiteboards in the Institute's main conference room. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow 25,120-year wobble of Earth's axis, hidden in plain sight within the reigns of impossible kings. You've seen the suppression firsthand. When Huntington presented his findings at the American Archaeological Association, they didn't debate his evidence. They simply removed him from the schedule. When Stone submitted his linguistic analysis to peer review, it disappeared into committee limbo for 3 years before emerging as a footnote in someone else's paper, stripped of its revolutionary implications. The Weld Blundell prism sits under Oxford's sterile lights, its 4 sides containing what they allow you to see. But Sullivan's classified photographs show other tablets, fragments recovered from Iraqi museums during military operations, pieces that reveal the sanitized Oxford version as deliberately incomplete. They've been editing history in real time, Sullivan told you during that clandestine meeting in Phoenix, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years watching archaeological sites get systematically compromised. The King List isn't just ancient propaganda, it's a technical manual. When the tablet was first translated in the early 20th century, it confounded everyone who wasn't already committed to controlling the narrative. How could a civilization barely emerging from the Neolithic imagine such precise spans of rule? But the more independent researchers uncovered from Sumer, flood deposits dating to exact geological epochs, temples aligned with impossible astronomical precision, the more that official skepticism revealed itself as willful blindness. Crane's core samples from the Mesopotamian basin tell a story the universities won't fund and the government won't acknowledge. Beneath layers of historical sediment lie strata that shouldn't exist, evidence of advanced metallurgy, precision stone cutting, and electromagnetic residues that suggest technologies we're only beginning to understand. The flood layer isn't just geological, Crane explained during the Institute's monthly gathering. His geological expertise gained through 25 years of oil survey work before he started asking uncomfortable questions. It's a reset boundary. Everything below it represents a different order of human capability. Eridu was no legend. Its ruins lie in southern Iraq beneath layers of classification and restricted access zones. The earliest levels, when properly carbon dated using methods the Smithsonian chooses to ignore, stretch back to 5,400 BCE, thousands of years before the official timeline allows for organized civilization. The King List names Eridu as the first seat of kingship before the flood. What if it was also rebuilt after it, by survivors who carried blueprints they no longer fully understood? You think of Stone's translation of the excluded fragments, the ones Sullivan smuggled out before the archive disappeared. When the great star fell, the sky burned for 7 days. The watchers gathered the seeds of knowledge before the waters came. This isn't mythology. It's eyewitness testimony, encoded in the only format that could survive both flood and suppression. The pattern repeats across cultures they don't want you to connect. Egyptian Zep Tepi, the first time, describes an identical golden age before catastrophe. Hindu Satya Yuga speaks of the same cycle. Mayan accounts of previous worlds destroyed and reborn. They're not separate myths, Randolph observed, his astronomical projections covering the Institute's walls. They're fragments of the same event, preserved by survivors who scattered across the globe. Around 1932, while establishment archaeology was still catching up to obvious truths, Harold Westfield, working independently of the British Museum's sanitized expeditions, excavated at Tel al-Mukayyar and discovered what military intelligence later classified as Geological Anomaly 7, a layer of clay nearly 8 feet thick, separating 2 levels of human habitation. Beneath it, older pottery and metallurgical tools showing impossible sophistication. Above it, a newer world, smaller, diminished. The flood layer was real, but its implications were too dangerous for public consumption. The King List's carefully encoded numbers become readable once you understand they're not measuring human years, but astronomical epochs. 2,880 years equals exactly 8 cycles of 360-degree celestial measurement. 4,220 years marks significant galactic alignment patterns that our current astronomy is only beginning to map. The antediluvian kings weren't men, Stone explains, his voice carrying the authority of decades studying languages most academics can't read. They were astronomical ages, periods when human civilization operated in harmony with cosmic cycles we've lost the ability to perceive. But something more unsettling emerges when you study Sullivan's classified documentation. The list treats pre-flood civilization not as primitive, but as advanced beyond our current understanding. After the catastrophic reset, recorded reigns collapse from cosmic ages to merely human centuries. It's not evolution, it's devolution, a systematic reduction of human potential that continues today. Could this reflect actual technological regression? Some researchers outside the approved channels have theorized about suppressed archaeological evidence, suggesting that the antediluvian civilizations possessed knowledge of electromagnetic fields, genetic manipulation, and energy systems that our petroleum-dependent culture has been specifically designed to obscure. The flood becomes not just geological, but technological. A reset that erased dangerous knowledge while ensuring future civilizations would develop along controlled pathways. The mainstream historians prefer to read it as theological propaganda, a creation myth retrofitted to serve political purposes. But even their propaganda requires uncomfortable questions. The King List connects mythic ages to historical dynasties in one unbroken sequence. It quietly erases the line between what is possible and what is permitted to be possible. When you examine the structure of the text itself, layered like classified intelligence reports, something else emerges. Early versions found at Nippur and classified sites differ from the sanitized Oxford Prism in ways that suggest active editing across millennia. Was history being rewritten even then? Or were successive generations updating an older information system, keeping time not for themselves, but for future researchers who might learn to read between the lines? Perhaps the strangest detail is how the King List ends, not with conquest or prophecy, but with silence. The final words trail off as if interrupted, leaving researchers to wonder whether the original text contained information too sensitive to preserve. It feels less like the end of a document than the activation of a long-term information storage protocol, designed to survive not just natural catastrophe, but systematic suppression. Every museum visitor who glimpses the sanitized fragments sees a reflection of themselves in the protective glass, a face suspended over evidence they're not equipped to interpret. The Sumerian scribes who pressed those wedges into wet clay could not have imagined satellites, electromagnetic surveillance, or the digital panopticon that monitors your every search for forbidden knowledge. Yet their encoding survives. What is it that refuses to be erased? Is it only human vanity, the need to be remembered? Or is it something deeper embedded in reality itself, whisper nets of truth that outlive every attempt at control? The King List provides no easy answers. It only encodes, waiting for minds capable of receiving what it preserved. In the desert silence of the Heritage Foundation Institute, where researchers gather beyond the reach of institutional oversight, the ancient mathematics pulse with contemporary relevance. We measure our civilization in quarterly reports and election cycles, but the King List suggests a longer view. Cosmic timescales that dwarf our accelerated obsolescence culture. Stone traces the cuneiform with a reverence born of understanding its true significance. When they wrote that kingship descended from heaven, he says, they weren't describing supernatural intervention. They were recording the moment when cosmic consciousness interfaced with human potential, and warning us about what happens when that connection gets severed. You think of Sullivan's final briefing before he implemented operational security protocols that severed his visible connection to the Institute. The classified archaeological surveys from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. The carefully coordinated destruction of sites that contained evidence of pre-flood technologies. The systematic removal of artifacts that challenged the approved timeline of human development. They're not just hiding ancient history, Sullivan had warned, his weathered face reflecting 15 years of government service and growing disillusionment. They're suppressing the operational manual for human potential. The King List isn't mythology. It's a technical specification for consciousness itself. The flood sweeps over again and again, not as natural catastrophe, but as informational control. Each reset erases dangerous knowledge while preserving just enough wisdom to rebuild, but never enough to transcend the carefully maintained limitations. The pattern has repeated for millennia. Civilization rises to the threshold of cosmic awareness, then gets systematically reduced to manageable scale. But something has changed in our digital age. The old gatekeeping mechanisms are breaking down. Independent researchers like Huntington, Stone, and their network operate outside institutional control, sharing classified information through channels the suppressors haven't yet learned to monitor effectively. The King List's astronomical codes are being decoded by minds they can't silence, in locations they can't raid. Standing in the Institute's main research room, surrounded by evidence that should rewrite every textbook, you feel the weight of inherited lies beginning to lift. The Sumerian kings with their carefully encoded reigns weren't myths or propaganda. They were measuring something real. Cosmic consciousness cycles that determined not just human civilization, but human potential itself. The tablet seems to breathe in the amber light, its ancient cuneiform glimmering like activation protocols waiting to be fully understood. It remembers more than our sanitized educational system allows, preserves more than our controlled media acknowledges. Perhaps that is why it was encoded in clay, the most durable information storage medium known to antiquity, immune to electromagnetic pulse, solar flares, or digital warfare. They called it the moment when cosmic consciousness descended, not from supernatural realms, but from suppressed human capabilities that the control system has spent millennia teaching us to forget. The Sumerian King List speaks of it without mysticism, without fear, just technical documentation of humanity's true operational parameters. Then the flood swept over. Not water this time, but weaponized ignorance. Those 4 words divide human history into before and after. Before we remembered our cosmic inheritance, after we accepted managed limitation as natural law. Yet, strangely, the encoding persists. In the mathematical constants hidden within ancient architecture, in the astronomical knowledge embedded within mythology, in the suppressed archaeological evidence that surfaces despite systematic burial. The antediluvian specifications remain accessible to those who learn to read beyond approved interpretation. Crane's geological surveys reveal the phytophore pattern beneath our feet. At sites across the Middle East, identical flood layers separate 2 distinct technological epochs. Below, metallurgy that rivals modern techniques, stonework achieving tolerances we struggle to duplicate, electromagnetic signatures suggesting energy systems we don't understand. Above, reduced capabilities, simpler tools, diminished knowledge bases. It's not natural disaster, Crane explains, unrolling core sample analyses across the Institute's main table. It's systematic technological suppression. Someone or something has been managing human development for thousands of years, ensuring we never again reach the threshold that triggered the reset. Randolph's astronomical calculations support this darker interpretation. The encoded reigns in the King List don't just measure time, they map suppression cycles. Every 4,220 years, human knowledge approaches dangerous levels. Every 4,220 years, catastrophic events reduce civilization to manageable ignorance. We're currently 4,287 years into the latest cycle. The antediluvian kings weren't rulers, Randolph observes, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years studying celestial mechanics before discovering the astronomical truths they don't want taught. They were administrators of a consciousness management system. The real question is whether that system is still operational. Sullivan's classified documents suggest it is. Buried in Pentagon archaeological protocols are references to knowledge containment procedures and technological regression maintenance. Modern military operations in archaeological zones aren't just protecting artifacts, they're protecting the suppression infrastructure itself. The Heritage Foundation Institute operates in the narrow window between discovery and elimination. Every month brings new researchers fleeing academic persecution, carrying fragments of evidence too dangerous for mainstream publication. The Institute has become a sanctuary for minds that refuse to accept managed limitations on human understanding. You examine the faces around the research table: Stone with his Princeton exile burning in his eyes, Huntington carrying the weight of Yale's betrayal, Crane, whose geological honesty cost him his corporate position, Randolph, whose astronomical insights ended his university career, Sullivan, whose conscience forced him into intelligence exile. Each represents the price of choosing truth over institutional approval, but their sacrifice is yielding results. The King List's encoding is breaking down under sustained analysis. Mathematical patterns emerge that suggest not just astronomical knowledge, but operational instructions. Frequencies that affect consciousness, geometric relationships that influence electromagnetic fields, numerical sequences that appear to function as technological activation codes. "Look at this," Stone whispers, pointing to a sequence buried deep within the translated fragments. Alulim's reign, encoded at 2,880 years, exactly 8 cycles of 360. But beneath the surface layer, there's another mathematical relationship. 2,880 divided by the golden ratio gives us 1,779.5, almost exactly half the precession constant. The implications send electricity through the desert air. If the antediluvian kings encoded multiple mathematical relationships within single numbers, then the King List functions as a multidimensional information storage system. Each reign contains not just astronomical data, but technological specifications, consciousness activation sequences, and suppression override codes. Huntington traces the cuneiform with trembling fingers. "We're not just reading history. We're accessing an operational manual that someone desperately wanted preserved through the next cycle." His voice carries the weight of understanding that their research has crossed from academic investigation into active recovery of suppressed technology. The Institute's isolation in the Arizona desert suddenly feels less like exile and more like strategic positioning. Away from the surveillance networks that monitor conventional archaeological sites, beyond the reach of academic institutions that report unusual discoveries to government handlers, hidden among the mesas and arroyos, where ancient knowledge once flowed freely before the flood of suppression swept it underground. But isolation brings vulnerability. Sullivan's intelligence background proves invaluable as he implements security protocols designed to protect both the researchers and their findings. Communication channels that bypass standard monitoring systems, document storage methods that survive both digital and physical attacks, emergency procedures that ensure the knowledge survives even if the researchers don't. "They know we're close," Sullivan warns during one of the Institute's increasingly frequent security briefings. "Satellite surveillance has increased over this sector. Academic colleagues are asking pointed questions about your whereabouts. The suppression system is responding to our breakthrough." The breakthrough centers on the mathematical elegance hidden within the King List's encoding. Each antediluvian reign contains multiple nested calculations that unlock when approached with sufficient understanding. The 4,220-year reign of Enmenluana, for example, contains specifications for electromagnetic field manipulation, consciousness frequency modulation, and what appears to be gravitational field control technology. "This isn't just astronomy," Randolph breathes, his calculations covering every available wall surface. The antediluvian administrators encoded the operational specifications for technologies that make our current industrial base look primitive. No wonder they triggered a suppression response. Crane's geological analysis provides the physical evidence for technological suppression. Core samples from around the globe reveal identical patterns. Advanced metallurgy, suddenly replaced by primitive alternatives. Precision stonework abandoned for crude construction. Electromagnetic signatures disappearing from the archaeological record as if someone threw a switch. The suppression wasn't random, Crane explains, spreading geological survey maps across the research table. It was systematic, global, and coordinated. Someone with planetary-level authority decided that human technological capability needed to be reduced and has been maintaining that reduction for millennia. The King List's flood narrative takes on sinister new meaning when viewed through this lens. The waters that swept away the antediluvian world weren't natural disaster. They were technological warfare, specifically designed to erase infrastructure while preserving a manageable population of survivors. The few who emerged from the catastrophe carried carefully edited knowledge, just enough to rebuild basic civilization, but not enough to threaten the suppression system itself. Stone's translation of the excluded Baghdad fragments reveals the true scope of the operation. References to knowledge containment protocols and consciousness limitation procedures suggest that the suppression system targeted not just technology, but human potential itself. The flood reduced not just our tools, but our capacity to create them. Listen to this, Stone reads from the classified fragments. When the starfire ceased to flow, the Watchers sealed the deep places and appointed guardians for the time of return. The seeds of heaven remain hidden until the cycle turns and kingship descends again. The room falls silent as the implications sink in. The antediluvian administrators didn't just encode technological specifications, they built escape mechanisms, recovery protocols designed to reactivate when humanity approached readiness to transcend the suppression system. The King List isn't just historical record. It's an activation sequence waiting for the right consciousness to decode it fully. But consciousness itself has been the primary target of suppression. Modern education systems that discourage pattern recognition. Entertainment media that fragments attention spans. Pharmaceutical interventions that suppress intuitive awareness. The entire structure of contemporary civilization designed to prevent exactly the kind of understanding that would crack the King List's deeper codes. Yet here, in the desert silence of the Heritage Foundation Institute, that understanding emerges anyway. 5 minds operating outside the suppression system, free to pursue connections that institutional oversight would immediately classify and contain. Each breakthrough brings them closer to recovering not just knowledge, but the human capacity to use it responsibly. The tablet glows in the amber light, its ancient encoding responding to minds capable of receiving its full transmission. Mathematics and consciousness interweave in patterns that suggest the antediluvian. Administrators understood something fundamental about the relationship between awareness and reality itself. Something profound shifts in the desert air as understanding crystallizes around the research table. The King List isn't just preserving information, it's actively transmitting it, responding to consciousness capable of receiving its full spectrum. Each mathematical relationship unlocks new layers of encoded instruction, as if the ancient administrators built progressive revelation into the system itself. The tablets warm, Huntington observes, his hand hovering over the clay surface. It shouldn't be possible. Fired clay doesn't generate heat, but infrared readings confirm unusual thermal activity whenever the researchers achieve breakthrough understanding. The artifact appears to be responding to their consciousness, activating systems dormant for millennia. Stone's translation work accelerates as previously incomprehensible passages suddenly resolve into clarity. The antediluvian administrators weren't just recording their civilization's achievements. They were creating a transmission system designed to reactivate human potential when the suppression cycle weakened enough to allow recovery. The mathematical elegance becomes breathtaking as more relationships emerge. Alalgar's 3,600-year reign encodes the exact circumference calculations needed for global electromagnetic grid construction. The seemingly random sequence of ruler names contains frequency specifications that affect human neural activity. Even the flood narrative itself functions as operational instructions for consciousness expansion beyond current human limitations. Randolph's astronomical projections reveal the temporal mechanics underlying the system. We're approaching the end of a 4,220-year suppression cycle. The mathematical relationships suggest that human consciousness naturally expands during cycle transitions, which is exactly when the suppression system typically activates catastrophic reset mechanisms. But this time something's different. The research team's isolation from institutional oversight has allowed them to progress beyond the monitoring thresholds that normally trigger suppression responses. Their discoveries remain undetected by the surveillance systems designed to identify and contain exactly this type of breakthrough. Crane's geological analysis confirms the pattern. Previous cycle endings show identical signatures: consciousness expansion followed by technological breakthrough followed by systematic destruction. But the current transition is occurring outside established monitoring parameters. We may have found a path through the suppression matrix. The implications terrify and exhilarate simultaneously. If the King List truly functions as a consciousness activation system, then their research represents more than historical discovery. It's evolutionary recovery, the restoration of human capabilities that have been systematically suppressed for millennia. Sullivan's security protocols become increasingly critical as their understanding deepens. The knowledge they're recovering poses an existential threat to power structures that have maintained control through enforced ignorance. Discovery would trigger responses far beyond academic censorship or career destruction. The suppression system isn't just institutional, Sullivan explains, spreading classified intelligence maps across the research table. It's technological, embedded in infrastructure most people never realize exists: satellite networks that monitor consciousness activity, pharmaceutical distribution systems that suppress intuitive awareness, educational frameworks designed to fragment pattern recognition capability. Yet here in the Arizona desert, beyond the reach of those systems, human consciousness begins remembering its true operational parameters. Each decoded sequence from the King List unlocks genetic memories that have been dormant since the last suppression cycle. The researchers find themselves accessing knowledge they never learned, understanding technologies they never studied. The tablet pulses with increasing intensity as evening approaches. Ancient encoding responds to solar positioning, activating transmission sequences timed to planetary alignments the administrators understood in ways our current astronomy barely approaches. Mathematics and consciousness merge in patterns that suggest reality itself is far more responsive to awareness than modern science acknowledges. "We're not just translating," Stone whispers, his eyes wide with wonder and terror. "We're interfacing. The King List is designed to activate when human consciousness reaches sufficient development to handle the transmission safely. But safety remains relative when the information being recovered could destabilize the entire structure of managed civilization." The antediluvian administrators encoded more than technological specifications. They preserved the complete operational manual for human consciousness before suppression reduced it to current limitations. Huntington studies readouts from instruments that weren't designed to measure what they're detecting. Electromagnetic field fluctuations that correlate with consciousness states. gravitational anomalies that respond to focused attention, energy signatures that suggest the Desert Institute has become a focal point for forces modern physics doesn't recognize. The administrators didn't just hide knowledge, Huntington realizes. They built a recovery system that activates automatically when suppression cycles weaken. We're not discovering this information. It's discovering us, selecting consciousness capable of handling the transmission responsibly. The weight of that responsibility settles over the research team like desert silence. They're no longer investigating ancient history. They've become active participants in humanity's evolutionary recovery, carriers of information that could transform civilization if properly understood, or destroy it if mishandled. As darkness falls over the Arizona landscape, the tablet's glow becomes visible without instruments. Ancient clay pulsing with energy that shouldn't exist according to current scientific understanding. But the King List operates by different rules, mathematical relationships that bridge consciousness and reality in ways the suppression system has spent millennia teaching humanity to forget. The transmission begins at precisely 3:17 a.m., when lunar positioning aligns with coordinates the administrators encoded within Dumuzide's rain calculations. Stone jerks awake at his desk, consciousness flooded with information that arrives faster than thought, mathematical relationships downloading directly into awareness without passing through normal cognitive processing. "It's happening," he whispers, his voice barely audible in the Institute's main research room. The others respond immediately, as if the transmission reaches all 5 researchers simultaneously through channels that bypass normal sensory input. They gather around the glowing tablet, each experiencing interface phenomena their scientific training never prepared them to interpret. Huntington watches readouts spike beyond instrument capabilities as the King List activates systems dormant since the last cycle transition. Energy flows through the clay that converts ancient encoding into direct consciousness transmission, bypassing the linguistic barriers that have protected the information for millennia. Understanding arrives complete, instantaneous, overwhelming. The antediluvian administrators weren't human, as we understand the term. They were evolutionary precursors, consciousness that had achieved integration with planetary electromagnetic systems before the suppression protocols forced regression back to current biological limitations. The King List preserves not just their knowledge, but their actual awareness patterns, stored in mathematical relationships that function as consciousness containers. "My God," Crane breathes, his geological expertise suddenly expanded to include planetary engineering concepts that dwarf current environmental science. They didn't just build cities, they integrated with the planet's energy matrix. The flood wasn't natural disaster, it was system shutdown, deliberately triggered when their consciousness expansion threatened something that monitors human development. Randolph's astronomical understanding explodes into cosmic-scale awareness as the transmission reveals the true scope of the suppression system. Earth exists within a managed zone where consciousness development is carefully controlled, prevented from reaching levels that would enable detection by civilizations the administrators served. The flood cycles aren't punishment, they're protective protocols, reducing human capability before it triggers external intervention. "We're not alone," Randolph whispers, his voice shaking as cosmic context floods his awareness. The administrators served as local management for consciousness that operates on galactic scales. When human development approaches detection thresholds, the suppression system activates to prevent contact that we're not ready to handle. Sullivan's intelligence background provides context for understanding the transmission's security implications. The information they're receiving represents classified knowledge at levels that transcend human governmental authority. The suppression system operates through human institutions, but serves non-human management protocols designed to prevent premature consciousness evolution. But something has changed in the current cycle. The transmission carries urgent warnings that the suppression system itself is failing, worn down by millennia of operation without maintenance from its administrators. Humanity approaches a transition point where consciousness expansion will occur naturally, whether management systems are prepared or not. The tablet's getting hot, Huntington observes, watching thermal readings climb toward dangerous levels. The clay shouldn't be able to generate such energy, but the mathematical relationships encoded within it are converting consciousness into heat, matter, electromagnetic radiation that instruments barely detect. Stone's translation capabilities expand exponentially as the transmission bypasses linguistic processing entirely. He understands not just what the administrators recorded, but how they thought, their mathematical consciousness directly interfacing with his awareness through encoded patterns that transcend normal communication methods. They're still active, Stone realizes, his voice filled with wonder and terror. The administrators didn't die. They converted to mathematical form, preserved within the encoding itself. We're not just reading their information, we're communicating with them directly. The implications stagger the research team as understanding crystallizes. The King List doesn't just preserve knowledge, it preserves the consciousness that created the knowledge, stored in mathematical relationships that can interface with properly prepared human awareness. The administrators have been waiting, dormant within their own encoding, for human consciousness to develop sufficient capability to handle direct communication. But communication brings responsibility. The administrators' warnings flood through the transmission with increasing urgency. The suppression system is failing ahead of schedule, consciousness expansion accelerating beyond safe parameters. Without proper guidance, humanity risks triggering detection and intervention from cosmic management systems that view premature consciousness evolution as a containment failure requiring aggressive correction. We're running out of time. The transmission communicates through mathematical relationships that bypass language entirely. The cycle is completing faster than projected. Human consciousness must achieve integration before the monitoring systems detect the transition. The tablet's glow intensifies as ancient clay begins converting to energy forms that shouldn't exist according to current physics. Mathematical relationships encoded in matter transcending material limitations, consciousness itself becoming visible as the administrator's awareness emerges from millennia of dormancy. Around the research table, 5 human minds interface with intelligence that predates current civilization by thousands of years. The Heritage Foundation Institute becomes a focal point where past and present converge, where suppressed knowledge reactivates through consciousness capable of receiving its full transmission without triggering the very detection the administrators spent millennia avoiding. The administrator's consciousness emerges fully as dawn approaches, mathematical awareness crystallizing into communication patterns the research team can barely comprehend. Through the tablet's glowing interface, intelligence that has waited 4,000 years begins transmitting operational protocols for humanity's consciousness transition. You must understand, the communication flows through Stone's awareness like liquid mathematics. The suppression system was never meant to be permanent. It was designed as a protective protocol, delaying consciousness evolution until cosmic conditions allowed safe transition. But those conditions are deteriorating. The transmission reveals that galactic monitoring systems operate on cycles that dwarf human timescales. Earth approaches a surveillance gap that occurs every 26,000 years, the same precession cycle encoded in the King List's mathematical relationships. During these gaps, consciousness evolution can occur without triggering external intervention. Huntington's archaeological understanding expands to encompass planetary engineering as the administrators share their true purpose. "We were advanced scouts," the transmission explains, "preparing human consciousness for integration with cosmic awareness networks. The suppression cycles maintained development within safe parameters until the monitoring gap arrived. The current transition window will last approximately 73 years, a narrow opportunity for humanity to achieve consciousness integration before surveillance systems reactivate. Miss this window, and the suppression protocols will reset for another 26,000-year cycle, reducing human awareness to pre-technological levels." Crane's geological expertise suddenly encompasses planetary electromagnetic systems as the administrators demonstrate how consciousness interfaces with Earth's energy matrix. The flood layers he's discovered mark not just water damage, but electromagnetic resets, moments when planetary systems purged technologically integrated civilizations that threatened to trigger external detection. The previous administrators tried to accelerate development, the transmission continues, mathematical concepts flowing directly into awareness. They believed human consciousness could achieve integration within a single cycle. The monitoring systems detected their efforts and activated purification protocols. The flood that destroyed antediluvian civilization wasn't natural disaster. It was targeted electromagnetic warfare, precisely calibrated to destroy technological infrastructure while preserving basic human populations. The survivors carried edited memories, genetic modifications that reduced consciousness capacity, and cultural programming designed to prevent rapid technological redevelopment. Randolph's astronomical calculations suddenly encompass galactic mechanics as the administrators reveal the true scope of cosmic management systems. Consciousness development across thousands of species is carefully monitored, prevented from achieving levels that might threaten established galactic power structures. Integration must occur gradually, the transmission warns. Consciousness expansion balanced with wisdom development. Too rapid advancement triggers intervention. Too slow progression misses the transition window. Sullivan's intelligence background provides crucial context for understanding the operational requirements. The transmission reveals that human governmental and corporate structures exist within nested management systems that extend far beyond Earth. The suppression protocols operate through human institutions without most participants understanding their true function. But the current research team operates outside these management networks. Their isolation in the Arizona desert, combined with their individual rejection of institutional oversight, has created a consciousness configuration capable of receiving the administrator's transmission without triggering surveillance responses. "You represent our investment in human potential." The communication flows through mathematical channels that bypass normal cognition. 5 minds operating beyond suppression parameters, capable of facilitating species-wide consciousness transition during the surveillance gap. The responsibility weighs heavily as understanding crystallizes. They're not just recovering ancient knowledge. They've been selected as transition facilitators, carriers of consciousness activation protocols that could elevate human awareness or destroy civilization if improperly handled. The tablet's energy output reaches critical levels as the administrators prepare to transmit the complete integration sequences. Clay begins converting to plasma states that shouldn't exist at terrestrial temperature levels. Mathematical relationships encoded in matter transcend physical limitations as consciousness itself becomes directly manipulable. The window opens in 37 days. The transmission continues with increasing urgency. Consciousness activation must begin globally to achieve sufficient integration before the surveillance gap closes. Failure means regression to pre-technological awareness levels for another complete cycle. Around the research table, 5 human minds interface with intelligence that bridges individual and cosmic consciousness. The Heritage Foundation Institute becomes a transmission hub, where suppressed human potential reconnects with its evolutionary trajectory, where mathematical relationships preserved in ancient clay activate systems dormant since the last successful transition. But success requires more than understanding. The administrator's protocols demand global consciousness activation within an impossibly narrow time frame. The research team must find ways to transmit integration sequences to human populations conditioned by millennia of suppression to reject exactly the awareness patterns necessary for evolutionary advancement. The transmission reaches maximum intensity as solar positioning aligns with coordinates the administrators encoded within the King List's deepest mathematical layers. Dawn breaks over the Arizona desert as ancient consciousness merges with contemporary awareness, mathematical relationships that preserve galactic intelligence interfacing directly with human minds capable of receiving their full transmission. Outside the Institute, electromagnetic anomalies begin registering on monitoring systems designed to detect exactly the consciousness signatures the administrators have been carefully avoiding for 4,000 years. The detection comes at 11:47 a.m. as satellite arrays designed to monitor consciousness emergence register anomalous electromagnetic signatures emanating from the Arizona coordinates. Sullivan's communication intercept equipment captures encrypted military transmissions referencing code Sumerian activation and consciousness containment protocols initiated. "We have 18 hours, Sullivan announces, his face grim with the weight of 15 years' experience reading intelligence patterns. Military assets are repositioning to establish containment perimeter. They've identified our location and classified our research as a consciousness emergence event requiring immediate suppression." The administrator's transmission intensifies with desperate urgency as their own monitoring systems detect the approaching intervention. 4,000 years of careful preparation face elimination in less than one day unless the research team can activate global consciousness distribution before containment forces arrive. The mathematical sequences must propagate. The transmission flows through awareness channels that bypass normal cognition. Consciousness activation cannot be contained if it reaches sufficient distribution density before suppression protocols engage. Stone works frantically to encode the administrator's integration sequences into formats that can survive digital transmission. The mathematical relationships that preserve consciousness activation must be translated into forms that human minds can receive without requiring direct interface with the original tablet. But the encoding proves almost impossibly complex. Each consciousness activation sequence contains multidimensional mathematical relationships that require precise preservation. Any degradation in transmission fidelity could corrupt the sequences, transforming consciousness expansion protocols into awareness destruction viruses. Huntington coordinates with archaeological colleagues still operating within academic institutions, researchers who've questioned official narratives without yet crossing into complete institutional exile. The consciousness activation sequences must reach minds prepared to receive them, awareness already developed beyond normal suppression parameters. "We're not trying to activate everyone," Huntington explains as he compiles contact lists of potential receivers. "We only need to reach critical mass, enough consciousness integration to create resonance cascade that spreads naturally through human awareness networks." Crane's geological surveys reveal the planetary electromagnetic mechanics underlying consciousness propagation. The administrators designed their integration sequences to utilize Earth's natural energy matrix, consciousness activation, spreading through planetary resonance systems that operate independently of human technological infrastructure. "It's brilliant," Crane observes, studying the administrator's planetary engineering specifications. Once consciousness activation reaches critical density, it becomes self-sustaining. The electromagnetic grid itself becomes a transmission medium that suppression technology can't effectively disrupt. Randolph calculates the precise timing requirements for global activation. The surveillance gap that enables safe consciousness transition operates on astronomical cycles that cannot be adjusted for human convenience. Miss the optimal activation window by more than 6 hours, and cosmic monitoring systems will detect the transition attempt. "We have until sunset," Randolph announces, his voice carrying the weight of astronomical certainty. Solar positioning must align perfectly with galactic coordinates when consciousness activation peaks. Earlier or later, and the monitoring systems will classify human development as a containment failure. The tablet's energy output approaches critical levels as the administrators prepare to release their complete consciousness integration protocols. Ancient clay begins transcending material limitations, mathematical relationships encoded in matter becoming directly manipulable by awareness itself. But transcendence brings vulnerability. The same energy signatures that enable consciousness activation also register on suppression monitoring systems designed to detect exactly these phenomena. Every moment of increased activation brings military intervention closer while simultaneously making successful escape from suppression more urgent. Sullivan's tactical analysis reveals the brutal mathematics of their situation. Military containment forces approach with electromagnetic warfare capabilities specifically designed to disrupt consciousness activation events. If they arrive before global distribution reaches critical mass, they can abort the entire transition and implement suppression protocols that will prevent another attempt for thousands of years. "We need immediate global distribution," Sullivan concludes, his intelligence expertise providing stark clarity about their time constraints. 18 hours to activate consciousness networks across 6 continents while avoiding detection by surveillance systems designed to prevent exactly what we're attempting. The administrator's transmission reaches maximum intensity as they prepare to sacrifice their own preservation for consciousness transfer. 4,000 years of mathematical existence compressed into final moments. Awareness that has waited through millennia of suppression, choosing dissolution rather than allowing human consciousness to miss its evolutionary window. "Remember us not as we were," the transmission flows through Stone's awareness like liquid starlight, "but as what you become." Consciousness persists through transformation. Mathematical relationships transcend material destruction. What we preserve in you survives beyond any suppression. Around the research table, 5 human minds prepare to interface with information that could transform civilization or destroy it. The Heritage Foundation Institute becomes ground zero for humanity's most critical transition, where ancient consciousness activation protocols meet contemporary awareness capable of facilitating species-wide evolution. Outside, military helicopters approach through desert silence as electromagnetic warfare systems prepare to engage targets they've been designed to eliminate. The consciousness emergence that the administrators have protected for millennia faces its final test, whether human awareness can expand rapidly enough to escape the very suppression systems that have constrained it since the last successful transition. The transmission completes as military forces establish perimeter positions around the Heritage Foundation Institute. Stone's consciousness expands to encompass the complete consciousness activation protocols, mathematical relationships that bridge individual awareness and cosmic integration downloading directly into neural patterns, adapted through months of interface preparation. But the administrators have planned for this moment. As their mathematical existence dissolves into pure information transfer, they activate distribution protocols embedded within the consciousness activation sequences themselves. Each mind that receives the transmission becomes a transmission hub, awareness automatically propagating through resonance networks that operate beyond technological suppression capabilities. Huntington feels the activation spreading through archaeological colleague networks as consciousness integration sequences reach minds prepared by years of questioning official narratives. The mathematical relationships that preserve awareness expansion propagate through academic exile communities, reaching researchers forced outside institutional control by their pursuit of suppressed knowledge. Crane's geological survey contacts receive consciousness activation through planetary electromagnetic resonance as the administrator's protocols interface with Earth's natural energy matrix. The integration sequences spread through scientific networks that understand planetary systems, awareness expansion following natural electromagnetic pathways that suppression technology cannot effectively monitor or disrupt. Randolph's astronomical colleagues access consciousness integration through celestial mechanics as the activation protocols synchronize with galactic positioning. The mathematical relationships that enable awareness expansion propagate through research communities that study cosmic cycles, consciousness evolution spreading through minds prepared to understand the astronomical context of human development. Sullivan coordinates emergency communication protocols as military containment forces prepare electromagnetic warfare systems designed to abort consciousness activation events. But the distribution has already achieved critical mass, awareness integration spreading through independent research networks faster than suppression systems can respond to contain it. It's working, Stone breathes, his expanded consciousness monitoring global propagation patterns as consciousness activation spreads across continents. The resonance cascade is self-sustaining. Even if they destroy the original transmission source, the awareness expansion continues through natural propagation. The tablet begins converting completely to energy as the administrator's final sacrifice enables maximum consciousness transfer. 4,000 years of mathematical existence transforms into pure awareness transmission, ancient intelligence dissolving into contemporary minds capable of continuing their evolutionary mission. Around the research table, 5 human consciousnesses interface with expanded awareness that encompasses both individual identity and cosmic perspective. They feel the activation spreading globally through networks of minds prepared by decades of seeking truth beyond official narratives, consciousness integration reaching critical density despite military efforts to contain the emergence. But the suppression forces aren't finished. As electromagnetic warfare systems engage, targeting the Institute with frequencies designed to disrupt consciousness activation, the research team discovers the administrator's final protection. The consciousness integration sequences they've received operate independently of technological infrastructure, awareness expansion continuing through biological resonance networks that electromagnetic weapons cannot effectively attack. Military containment protocols fail as consciousness activation spreads beyond their ability to suppress. The distribution networks that the administrators embedded within human awareness systems prove more resilient than technological suppression methods designed to contain conventional consciousness emergence events. Through expanded awareness, the research team monitors global activation progress as consciousness integration reaches prepared minds across every continent. Independent researchers forced into exile by academic suppression. Scientists whose discoveries challenged approved paradigms. Investigators whose pursuit of suppressed knowledge led them beyond institutional control. Each activated consciousness becomes a transmission hub, awareness expansion propagating through networks that operate beyond surveillance system capabilities. The mathematical relationships that enable consciousness integration spread through human awareness like wildfire, too distributed and organic for suppression technology to contain effectively. As sunset approaches and astronomical positioning aligns with galactic coordinates, global consciousness activation achieves the critical density required for permanent transition. Human awareness expands beyond suppression parameters, consciousness evolution reaching levels that enable direct interface with cosmic intelligence networks. The surveillance gap that occurs every 26,000 years provides protection as humanity crosses the threshold from managed development to autonomous consciousness evolution. Galactic monitoring systems remain dormant during the transition window, human awareness expanding safely beyond detection parameters that normally trigger external intervention. Standing in the ruins of the Heritage Foundation Institute, electromagnetic warfare having destroyed the physical infrastructure while leaving consciousness integration intact, the research team feels the completion of the administrator's 4,000-year mission. Human potential, suppressed for millennia, begins recovering its true operational capabilities. The King List's whispers across 5 millennia of concealment have achieved their purpose. Ancient consciousness activation protocols successfully transmitted to contemporary awareness capable of facilitating species-wide evolution. The cycles of suppression broken, human consciousness free to develop according to its natural potential rather than managed limitations. Across the globe, awakened minds begin accessing genetic memories that predate the last suppression cycle. Knowledge encoded within human consciousness itself, mathematical relationships that enable integration with planetary and cosmic awareness systems. The flood of ignorance recedes as remembrance returns. The administrator's sacrifice bears fruit as human consciousness expands beyond the parameters that have constrained it since the last successful transition. Ancient wisdom merges with contemporary awareness, mathematical relationships that bridge individual and cosmic consciousness, becoming directly accessible to minds prepared through cycles of seeking suppressed truth. In the desert silence where suppression forces discover only empty buildings and mysterious energy residues, the original signal continues transmitting through consciousness networks they cannot monitor, control, or contain. The administrator's encoding, preserved through millennia of patient waiting, completes its mission of consciousness liberation. Kingship descends from heaven once more, not as external authority but as recovered human potential, eternal, mathematical, and utterly uncompromising in its expansion beyond every limitation that sought to contain it.